Strap in. This is a story of the Spanish Special Olympics.
It's the 2000 Sydney Paralympics, and the world had its eyes on Spain, hauling 107 medals in their most successful Paralympics ever. And especially for the intellectually disabled basketball team, dominating Russia in the final game, taking home that gold. But as soon as the celebrations began, and the team's picture was splashed across newspapers throughout Madrid, people stared back in amazement. Because these weren't the faces of intellectually disabled athletes, but rather professional basketball players cheating to win the Paralympics. If this sounds f***ed up, it's because it is, and soon one of the biggest cheating scandals in sports history was about to break. Now to some, the Paralympics is inspiration porn. To others, it's witnessing athletes overcome their disabilities. Or it's about what every other sport's about.
So
winning.
bad.
Let me be clear, the Paralympics is not a consolation prize. It's an elite level competition with athletes who train for years just to qualify. And they have a disability. But there lies a question. If all Paralympic athletes have a disability, wouldn't the least impaired one always win? Yeah. So to make the competition as fair as possible on an even playing field, all athletes are medically and performance tested to see if they can qualify together. So for example, with paraplegic is going to compete against someone with a double knee amputation. But then, what if an athlete held themselves back during testing on purpose? You know, like blowing lightly into a breathalyzer. Well, a few years back during the classification of a paraplegic handbiker, the doctors there discovered that his lower back muscles were twitching. And then like a miracle from God, the man could all of a sudden walk. After he confessed that he had borrowed his friend's wheelchair the day before the event because he wanted to see how far he could go. And of course the guy was kicked out. But what if you were to fake an intellectual disability?
Imagine trying out in the Special Olympics and then you get caught for not being special. And you're just like, I just wanted to see how far I could go. Like a challenge.
Well, for decades you couldn't. The Paralympics was strictly for athletes with a physical disability, and the Special Olympics was for athletes with an intellectual disability. Until this guy came around, Fernando Martín Vicente, head of the Spanish Paralympic program. Now, Fernando was instrumental in getting the intellectually disabled class added to the Sydney Paralympics for the sport of basketball. Now, this was a groundbreaking decision that had never been done. It always had been for decades. Intellectual disabilities and physical disabilities were completely separated. And hopefully Spain wouldn't f*** it all up. Now, Fernando's cushy job was very simple. More wins and gold medals meant more government funding for his Paralympic program. And while Spain was pretty dominant in most of the Paralympic sports, their new basketball ID team, I'm gonna be totally frank, they weren't too good. That year, they lost a string of minor championships throughout the world, and Fernando tried hiring new coaches, new training regimens, rotating the players, but it wasn't working. So feeling that he's exhausted every measure to improve the team before the Paralympics, he tells himself that just this once, he's gonna bend the rules a little bit. So in secret, finds among, friends of the coaches to include 4 players who did not meet the disability requirements, but would raise the competitive level of the team to win. So he puts the 4 players on the team, and they win the Brazil 98. They then win the Poland 99. And then he gets real ballsy and fills the entire team with non-disabled athletes. And of course, he wins the Iberian Cup in Portugal. And for a team that was now losing, they were now dominating left and right. But you may say, Vince, this isn't even the Paralympics yet. Why was Spain already cheating like this? Now, remember the funding that was for his program? Well, that money was also embezzled into his non-profit, the National Association of Special Needs Sports. Fernando had received millions and millions from the Spanish government that he had used to make himself a multi-millionaire, all through this little non-profit. Now, with his humble beginnings as a school teacher, in just 5 years of starting this non-profit, he owned 5 wineries, 3 estates, a sports club with a bull ring, a yacht. You see, more gold medals wasn't just funding for his team, but for himself. But like all criminals, Fernando convinced himself that he was doing this for a good cause because some of that government money would help out the disabled, even though he was taking a huge portion of it for himself, but that's besides the point. But even worse, Fernando now felt that he couldn't win it all without the cheating. He had become addicted to it.
Damn.
Now for the Spanish basketball ID team, a team of 12 players, he was going to take to the Paralympics 2 players that were actually intellectually disabled. The other 10 were gonna be the fakers, the guys that fluffed the game. So you gotta wonder, who the hell were the other 10? He had an engineer, he had an attorney, he had a writer, he had 2 college basketball point guards, and 5 semi-professional basketball players. And together, with the promise of a free trip to Australia and hundreds of thousands of dollars in sponsorship money, they were gonna rig the Paralympics. Now, in Fernando's eyes, Spain was guaranteed that gold medal.
Sleep at night, man.
Until the plans started falling apart in the second quarter of the first game. You see, Spain was up more than 30 points against China. They were playing so hard, the coach had to call a timeout, sit down the team, middle of the game,
against
and
all
say,
the
move it down
Chinese,
here, or they're gonna figure out you're not
disabled kids.
During the day, the team was winning, dominating, and at night, the team and the coaches would celebrate at Australia's hottest nightclubs, while they would leave the two intellectually disabled players alone in their hotel room all night. And when you really think about that, that's so f***ed up. It's the final match, Spain versus Russia. They have one shot, one opportunity to seize everything they've ever wanted. Now, while Spain had to hold back for other teams, Russia made them work damn hard breaking a sweat because Spain almost lost the game. But I said almost, because they beat Russia 87-63, and Spain starts popping bottles, celebrating, they're signing sponsorships left and right, and they capture the moment on film for the world to see. But as the team flew back home to Spain, rumors began to swirl online because some of these players in their victory picture looked a bit too familiar. Remember that writer that played on the team? Well, that was Carlos Ribagorda, an undercover journalist, and just 1 week after the win, he blows the whistle on the entire scam of the Spanish Paralympic team, and the world is absolutely blown away.
The Spanish Federation did not hesitate to sign up athletes with any type of disability. Besides taking my blood pressure, there was no medical or mental testing, so corrupt doctors forged documents to prove we were mentally disabled. Spain simply wanted to win more medals.
Forging the documents.
I played pickup basketball, and when a friend offered me the opportunity to play on Paralympic team, I took the opportunity to write an expose. Spain did not just use non-disabled athletes in basketball, but also track, table tennis, and swimming.
Now, in Carlos's eyes, there was one person to blame for this entire thing: Fernando Martín Vicente. But definitely not himself, right? He was exposing the conspiracy by participating in it for over 2 years. He had nothing to do with it, right? Now, immediately, the IPC and the Spanish government would open up.
Yeah, bro, just snitched on himself. He was like, these guys are pretending to be to win the Olympics. And he's like, who? Well, me and a bunch of other people.
Massive investigations into this entire scandal that wouldn't end for over 10 years. Now, Spain would be ordered to give all of its medals back, and for the two players that actually were intellectually disabled, man, I can't even imagine the pain those players must have felt. And now Russia would get the gold medals, right? You would think, they lost the second game. Well, see, the Paralympic Committee investigation found that every country had participated more or less in similar frauds and cheating at the Paralympics. Let that one sink in real quick. Some countries had used athletes with dyslexia, claiming they were intellectually disabled. Australia admitted 3 of its players weren't even disabled. And Russia, they couldn't even prove their players were disabled. So if you look today on the IPC website, it actually lists no one for the gold medal winner. Russia would never get the gold. They couldn't even prove their own players were disabled. So after having this class, intellectual disability, for 1 year, they decided to ban it for 9. Now, online, you read about this scandal. They always portray Carlos Ribagorda, the guy who went undercover, as a hero, the guy who revealed the dark truth. Snaps and claps for Carlos for cleaning up the Paralympics over here. But let's really think about what he did. He pretended to be disabled for 2 years to write one article. Yet, he never recorded any conversations. He never took any photos, documented absolutely nothing.
Damn,
Why
you're
didn't
about
he
to
come
eat
clean about
chicken
this earlier?
tendies?
His choice to reveal
Shout
this
out to
whole
your
thing
tendies,
last
bro.
minute has
That's
caused so many
legit. That's
athletes
really
to not
legit.
get sponsorships, scholarships for 9 years. And what I think's revealing is that Carlos to this day has said nothing publicly about this story. Because why did Carlos choose to expose the team only after people started recognizing their picture in the newspaper? But here's my whole theory. Carlos was in on the whole scam. He was there to make money, he was there to cheat. But once that picture started getting people's attention, he realized, well, in order to save myself, I need to expose the team before the scam exposes me. One of the great unknowns still to this day is, why did any of these 10 players agree to do this? Only one player's ever said anything about this, and everyone else
tell the chicken tendies.
Now, the team was allegedly told that this was legal and normal. They would be on the Paralympic team as collaborators, and that it was normal to mix teams of disabled and non-disabled players to balance.
Bro, this guy's literally a supervillain. The coach.
The game, and that this would be more like social work, because all the money that was won would go right back to the disabled, even though it went right back in Fernando's pockets, but that's besides the point. But like, how did these players justify this trip to their family One of these guys was an attorney. Like, how do you justify to your firm, like, oh, I'm leaving for 2 weeks to go play in the Paralympics? And the thing I think is so dumb was they used their real names. Like, how stupid do you have to be? Well, they're Spanish, so...
They didn't even make an alias.
Now, when the scandal broke, Fernando sat on the board of the IPC and so many of these nonprofits that focused on intellectual disabilities. And immediately after this thing broke out, he was forced to resign from all of them. Now, his case would take 13 years to finally go through and be charged with fraud. Now, the prosecutor was asking for 2 years in prison for the fraud, for the embezzlement, for the embarrassment of the Spanish people. I mean, this is like the one event you don't want to cheat in. Though Fernando had one comment to make about Carlos.
Carlos, who has been in the basketball team for 2 years.
That's crazy. So they literally pretended to be disabled to get into the Special Olympics. It sounds like a Will Ferrell movie from 2006 or something. It's terrible. I hope they go to hell.